In this lesson, we are going to be discussing the translucency part of the V-Ray material. We are working with our previous scene, but in this case, I have a complex dragon model, and lighting-wise, I have disabled my main and my dome light, and the fill light is going to be our main light in the scene. I've increased its multiplier to about 100. So let's open up our material editor and drag a V-Ray material to the active view and assign it to our dragon model. Translucency section is used to simulate subsurface scattering effect in V-Ray material. Subsurface scattering is when light enters an object with translucent properties and scatters beneath its surface. Something like candle, human skin, some fruits, for example, like grapes, are translucent. There is a better way in V-Ray to achieve subsurface scattering effect, and that is using V-Ray Fast SSS2 material, which we'll be discussing it in detail in its own lesson. Compared to Fast SSS2 material, the translucency section in V-Ray material is slower and gonna produce some artifacts in your render. And I honestly wouldn't use it that much, and Fast SSS2 just has tons more options to achieve really amazing subsurface scattering effects. But for now, let's say how the translucency section works. First, we have translucency type, which lets us to choose the subsurface scattering algorithm to be used. We have hard model for materials like marble, for example, soft model, which is for legacy purposes, and hybrid model, which is the best and most realistic model and can be used for translucent materials like skin and milk, for example. Now let's get the effect to work first. As we are dealing with subsurface scattering, so first we need to let the light rays to enter the object so we can scatter them inside the object, right? So the material first needs to have some refractive qualities. Let me change the refract color to a white color, maybe something like 180. Now set the glassiness maybe to something like 0.8, so we have some glossy refractions, and set the IR maybe to something like 1.2 or 1.3. You can change these numbers later on based on the material that you want to make. What controls the color of the subsurface scattering is the fog color. When I have to work with the translucency options, I tend to set the fog color to a medium gray and instead use the backside color to change the color of the subsurface scattering effect. You can really simply use the fog color if you wanted to. It's basically doing the same job, and probably the fog color is even better. But in this case, because we're working with the translucency options, I'm gonna work with the backside color to control the color of the subsurface scattering effect, and at the end of the lesson I'll be using the fog color and kind of to change the subsurface scattering color overall. Now let's make sure fog color right now is set to a medium gray and use a yellowish color as our backside color, maybe something like 251 for red, 220 for green, and 12 for blue, and press OK. Now we are basically set up and we can take a look at a few different renders with different translucency types. The first render was done with hard model, the second one with soft model, and the last one with the hybrid model. You can see the soft model is the slowest to render and gives us a very inaccurate result in general, but both hard and hybrid model can be used for specific materials. For now, I'm going to set the translucency type to hard model. Thickness limits the distance any ray can be traced under the surface. Let's see a few renders with different thickness amounts. In the first render, thickness was set to 1. In the second one, it was set to 5, then 10, and finally 100. As you can see, after a certain value, which depends on the object's dimension, the thickness parameter does not alter the subsurface effect at all. For example, in this case, when thickness was changed from 1 centimeters to 5 centimeters, we can clearly see the subsurface effect in the entire volume of the object compared to 1 centimeter when we clearly see some dark parts. But from 5 to 10 and 10 to 100 centimeters, it does not change anything in the render. That's because 5 or 10 centimeters is enough for this object. If the object was bigger in dimensions, we might have needed to increase the thickness value so the subsurface scattering could include the entire volume of the object. In this case, let's set the thickness to maybe 100, as it doesn't really matter. Using light multiplier down here, you can control the strength of the subsurface effect. Let me change the translucency type to hybrid model for now and take a look at a few render with different light multiplier values. First render was done with light multiplier set to 0.1, and as you can see, we barely get any subsurface effect. The next one is 0.5, and we start to get some scattering effect, then 1, and finally 2, and as you can see, we have a much stronger effect in our last render. Now let's make sure light multiplier is set to 1. Next, we have scatter coefficient, which controls the direction of the scattered light rays underneath the surface. 0 means light rays can scatter in any direction, and 1 means light rays cannot change their incoming direction. And any in-between value obviously is going to mix the two sides. In the frame buffer, the first render was done with scatter coefficient set to 0. The next one 0.5, and finally 1. For normal subsurface scattering look, scatter coefficient of 0 is more realistic, but the option is here if you want to use if need be. Let's make sure scatter coefficient is set to 0 again. Forward backward coefficient controls the direction of scattering for array. 0 means array can only go forward away from the surface inside the object. 0.5 means array can go backward and forward, and 1 means array will be scattered backward toward the surface to the outside of the object. And I quoted this directly from the Chaos Group website. Now let's see a few renders. In the first one, forward backward coefficient was set to 0. The next one was set to 0.5, and finally we have a render with the default value of 1. And as you can see in the first render, contrast is more, and as we increase the value, the contrast decreases. Let's set the forward backward coefficient to maybe 1. And finally, we have the backside color, which lets you change the overall color of the effect. Let me just run the active shade and try a few colors here. Obviously, the final color of your subsurface scattering effect and your object in general, your material, will be a mix of the diffuse color, reflection color, refraction color, fog color, and your backside color. So you need to pay attention to all of those colors. Let's, as the active shade is running, we can go ahead and change the diffuse color and see how it affects the overall render. Down here, maybe we can add some reflections. We can possibly change the backside color to white, which is its default state, and adjust the fog color. And as you can see, and as I'm changing the fog color here, the result is very close to changing the backside color. So let's set the fog color to 139 and 199 and 9. And generally speaking, the backside color is actually supposed to kind of shift the fog color, add a tint to the fog color if you want to kind of have that fine control. So let me change the fog color to 139, 199 and 9. Also, let's set the reflection to something like 100, and reflection glassiness maybe to 0.9. Now let me just stop the active shade and show you a render with these new settings. So here is our final image with the new fog and backside colors. And here is another one where the fog color was set to a purplish color. Perfect, so that's about translucency, and I will see you in the next lesson to talk about self-illumination, which is going to be a very short lesson. See you there.